A strategic partnership or a marriage of convenience? China and Russia vow to strengthen their ties. Both countries are engaged in standoffs with the US. But can they build a united front against Washington? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Halla Mohieddeen. China and Russia's leaders say their countries are closer than they've ever been, and that's partly due to what they see as a common threat. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin's meeting in St. Petersburg was a display of the strength of their relationship and also a show of solidarity against the United States. Russia has been economically isolated for years due to Western sanctions over its invasion of Crimea in 2014. Meanwhile, China is in the grip of a trade war with the US that's seen tariffs imposed on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods. Well, speaking at the summit, Xi Jinping described Putin as a close friend and said there was scope for even greater cooperation in future.
Our bilateral relations have not reached the maximum and can become even better. We are ready to work together with Russia in order to continuously increase the effect of our country's high-level cooperation. Our cooperation will give our two peoples a bigger sense of achievement and enable us to promote the Russia-Chinese agenda in international affairs.
And Vladimir Putin spoke of new centres of global power and an end to US economic dominance.
New economic centers have emerged and the role of regional currencies has risen. The balance of powers and interests has shifted. Obviously, those deep changes require adaptation on the part of international financial organizations and rethinking the role of the dollar. After becoming the global reserve currency, the US dollar transformed into the instrument of pressure used by the US on the rest of the world.
Well, disputes with the US have brought China and Russia closer. Trade between them rose 25% in 2018 to a record high of more than $100 billion. Russia is a key source of energy and natural resources that fuel the Chinese economy. And Chinese investment in Russian infrastructure projects is an economic lifeline as Western sanctions start to bite. Well, they're also closely aligned on many global issues, including Venezuela, North Korea, Syria, and Iran. Well, let's bring in our panel. In Moscow, we have Viktor Olovich, a political analyst and commentator on international relations. In Pattaya, in Thailand, we're joined by Einar Tangen, a political and economic affairs commentator specialising in China. And in New Jersey, Stephen Rogers. He's the president of the America Winning Coalition. I'd like to welcome all of you to today's discussion. Viktor Olovich, let me start with you. Do you see this new relationship between China and Russia as a positive development?
Well, no one has done more to bring Moscow and Beijing closer together in the past few months and past few years than Washington. It was the White House, the American foreign policy establishment, that had decided to open a new Cold War against Russia and at the same time something that looks like a new Cold War against China. And of course, feeling pressure from Washington, feeling pressure from the Trump administration, both China and Russia are looking forward to a closer military relationship, to a closer geopolitical relationship, and to a closer economic relationship. Of course, with the steps that the White House under Donald Trump has taken against China, it is becoming more and more obvious to the Chinese leadership that the purpose in mind in Washington is not just to get a more fair trade agreement with China, but to seriously hamper and diminish the Chinese influence in the world, the Chinese geopolitical standing in the coming years and decades, and Chinese economic standing as a possible competitor of the United States.
Well,
it is quite obvious for
Well, sorry to cut you off. Well, let's see if from a Chinese perspective, that is the case. To you, Einar Tangen, do you see this new relationship as a positive development that will help China in the face of this trade war and increased pressure from the US?
I would actually agree with my colleague that what we have here is perhaps a marriage of convenience. China and Russia obviously have a lot of geopolitical issues that they share. Their outlook is much closer than the one that Donald Trump is pushing. But you know, this fade away from multilateralism is something that China opposes. Russia's somewhere in between, and Donald Trump is clearly intent on destroying the order that was created by the United States after the World War II. So in terms of what this means for China, I think they feel that they're pushed into this situation. China has resisted in the past any kind of call for any kind of formal, either military or political alliance. They simply want to do trade. But with the hostile acts going on, they see, you know, this, for instance, this attack on Huawei and these tariffs as the beginning, as said, a Cold War that does not appear to have an end and will, in fact, separate the United States from China.
Stephen Rogers, no one has done more to bring China and Russia together than President Donald Trump. A move perhaps we've heard there from Einar Tangen that China's assumed this mantle somewhat reluctantly, and it's all down to the efforts of your president. What do you say to that?
Well, I would not characterize this as a new Cold War. President Trump has been very consistent in making clear that the decisions he makes are decisions that are in the best interest of the American people. He has also said quite often that he understands that there are leaders throughout the world who will take positions that will be in the best interest of their people. Now, I noticed some of the wording used in the press reports over the Putin-Xi summit, that they were speaking in a business-like manner. So these are business decisions. Indeed, there is politics involved. I believe they're going to be using their summit as leverage with regard to the actions that the United States has taken. But I don't believe anyone's pushing panic buttons yet. These are decisions, or at least meetings and decisions that are being made in a business-like manner. And I've got to tell you, I'm an optimist. I think at the end of the day, all three of these leaders are going to be sitting down speaking about these issues, because these are addressing a global economy, and we're all involved in this. We're all in this together. So hopefully we'll all come together in the near future.
So do you think that this relationship, Stephen Rogers, is a way for the China and Russia to try and get the US to move? Because it sounds an awful lot like these two countries share a lot of common ground economically. And how can a closer relationship between China and Russia be in the best interests of US workers and US voters?
Well, you know, we've had and we continue to have a lot of trade with China. It's all about economy. It's all about money. I found it very interesting that President Xi in St. Petersburg did state that he was not looking to disrupt his relationship with the United States. I believe that was a signal to the United States saying, look, we might all have to sit down at one point and go further with these issues. So, as I said, no panic buttons are now being pushed. These are business decisions. Hopefully, they won't spill over into any serious negative impact.
Sure, but do you concede this is not...
We'll have to wait and see.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you concede at all that this relationship would not be in the best interests of the US?
I wouldn't say that right now. I think if there were military issues being talked about regarding the geopolitics of the region, yes, that would be serious. But none of that's on the table. It's all economy, all economics. So hopefully they're not going to go down that road where the United States or NATO or anyone feels that there are military threats to anyone. Those things weren't discussed. It was all about the economy.
OK. I see you shaking your head, Einar Tangen. Would you respond to that? This is purely economic and not military?
That's nonsense. So we just witnessing an incident between a Russian warship and a United States warship. in the South China Seas. This is an area that has never seen any confrontation between Russia and the U.S. in recent memory. Donald Trump is using big stick diplomacy. I don't think taking an ostrich-like approach and saying that, oh, it'll all work out, no one's hitting the panic buttons. I think if you just start talking to industry and technology, they are hitting the panic button, and so are the Americans' consumers when they start looking at what's happening in Mexico. Donald Trump has pushed an all-front war against allies, neighbors, and those he thinks he's in contention with. His worldview is creating the crisis. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with my colleague that this is all going to work out and that somehow we're in Kansas and this is just going to be wonderful stuff and that you shouldn't be worried. This is very serious stuff. This is the way that World War I happened. People sleepwalked into a terrible situation.
I'm going to come back to you in a second, Stephen Rogers, but if I could just pick up with you, Viktor Olovich. You also didn't seem to react favourably to Stephen's comments, and you also believe that there was perhaps an opportunity for military cooperation. Do you see this, Viktor Olovich, as a negotiation tactic from China and Russia to try and get the US to cut an easier deal? Or is this a more long-term strategic partnership?
Well, the American foreign policymakers had believed since the late 1980s and the early 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, after the Warsaw Pact dissipated, was disbanded, they believed that the so-called Pax Americana, a world order centered on American decision-making, is going to last, if not forever, then for a very, very long time. And of course, Washington has seen in the past few years, in the past decade, that China's economic power and China's military capabilities have grown significantly and and may even outpace American economic power in the next several decades. American foreign policymakers have also seen a resurgent Russia. They have seen that Russia is no longer a weak state that it was in the 1990s, and that's why they are taking. Yes.
So rather than talk about American foreign policy, I really do want to focus on this actual partnership itself. You say that Russia is becoming resurgent. Russia has been penalised by quite significant international tariffs since 2014. It desperately needs markets to sell its oil to sell its energy to, and China is now more willing to embrace that. So would you not say this is more of a transactional relationship rather than a shift in the entire foreign policy and global world order?
The current Russian-Chinese relationship is not just about economic cooperation. It's not just about increasing business cooperation. It is a reaction to the attempts by Washington to sideline and to weaken both China and Russia as its geopolitical and economic competitors. And of course, we have seen not only these meetings between Putin and Xi Jinping in St. Petersburg at the Economic Forum, we have seen them at major military exercises several months ago between China and Russia that took place in Russia. By the way, the Mongolian military also took part in the exercises, and that was a clear signal to Washington and to its closest Western allies that as long as pressure is going to be increased against Beijing and against Moscow, the cooperation between the two capitals is going to also be increasing as a counterbalance to American and wider Western pressure.
Okay, Stephen Rogers, we're hearing from Viktor Olovich that this isn't just economics on the table. This is military cooperation as well. This is very much an attempt to come up against US global power. Does that not alarm you, and would that not alarm President Trump?
No, it would not. Look, with all due respect, my colleague who mentioned the incident at sea the other day, That's nothing new. It's been going on for years between the Russian Navy and the United States Navy.
But not in the
Russian bombers
Pacific
were
Ocean.
flying
But
pretty
not
close
in the
to
Pacific
Alaska.
Ocean.
No, I agree with you, but it's all about posturing. The United States is a powerful country. They know we have the most powerful military on earth. They know we have a very strong economy. My colleague mentioned Mexico. Well, they caved yesterday. The Mexican government caved to the president yesterday. And now they're sitting at the table and they're cooperating regarding the immigration issue. And I bring that up for this point.
China and Russia
President
are not
Trump
Mexico.
is a great negotiator. With all due respect, our colleague brought it up, so I'm responding to what he said. But you're right. But at the end of the day, it's transitional. They're going to come together. The panic buttons are not flashing. This is all political posturing. And look, the President Trump is a builder. He builds relationships. No one wants to see a war. No one wants to see trouble in the Pacific. Again, I speak from at least believing how this president works. He's looking to build relationships, not divide them.
Einar Tangen.
I find that statement absolutely preposterous. I don't think Donald Trump has built any relationships other than with Israel and with Saudi Arabia. His track record has been one of divisiveness, of pushing, tearing apart the very multilateral institutions that we created. So I don't know where this is coming from, that he's a great negotiator. What has he done? I mean, this big stick diplomacy. You think Mexico, for one instance, is thinking that this is great? Do you really believe that the rest of the countries around the world who have been hit with these tariffs unilaterally by Donald Trump think that this is about relationship building? It's just preposterous. I don't know exactly where this is coming from, this repetition of don't hit the panic buttons. It's nonsense.
Stephen Rogers.
Well, if I may, look what happened in Great Britain. We have a special relationship with Great Britain, and they adore this president. Look what happened with NATO and our allies. He got them to the table to contribute more to the defense of the area. So, yes, he has built some tremendous good relationships, and unfortunately, the media is not projecting that. They're projecting the negative. But you speak to some of these world leaders, and by the way, President Xi mentioned last week, he's friendly with the President of the United States. President Putin, friendly with the President. There's a lot of mutual respect, a lot of it that we don't hear about. So that's why I don't think things are as bad as some people are projecting it to be.
Okay, Viktor Olovich, do you think that these warm relationships with President Trump will help to resolve the issues that some Americans have been voicing about this increased rapprochement, if you like, between China and Russia? Do you think this is down to relationships?
Let's be frank. Under the Trump administration, America's relationship with many of its partners has deteriorated, from Russia to China to even to Germany, which is a NATO member and has quite a cantankerous relationship with Washington for the last several years, especially with what America's new ambassador to Berlin has been doing in Germany.
Okay.
And so we can expect in the next few years an even more closer alliance between Moscow and Beijing that will become a stronger counterbalance to America's attempt at global dominance that is essentially waning.
Okay, Viktor Olovich, I want to focus on this relationship between Russia and China. How close, realistically, do you think these two countries can become? Because there are competing interests for the two. There are competing interests in Central Asia, in Africa, in the Arctic, and certainly Moscow views China's and President Xi's pet project, the Belt and Road Initiative, with more than a little degree of suspicion. Do you think China and Russia can enjoy very, very close relations?
Well, there are definitely challenges, but there are also great opportunities to expand those relations between Moscow and Beijing. We have seen a growing trade relationship between China and Russia in the past few years. We have seen a much closer political dialogue between the two nations. We have seen an expansion of Russian energy exports into China. And we have also seen expanding cultural dialogue. So,
absolutely, but with the energy contracts, I'm sorry to cut you off. With these energy contracts, a lot of them were signed in 2014, before the current tensions between the US and with China.
But when we talk about the business relations between Russia and China, just a few hours ago at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, there was a new agreement signed between Huawei and its Russian counterparts on the Chinese development of 5G networks in Russia.
And that's a very good point. Let me take that to Stephen Rogers.
We are seeing expanded cooperation in different areas.
Absolutely. I'm sorry to cut you all short, gentlemen, but we are in the dying minutes of this debate. Stephen Rogers, certainly the US is very keen to curtail Huawei and its 5G networks. Does this not look like shooting yourselves in the foot to allow a relationship to develop between China and Russia, where Huawei can now sign a very lucrative contract indeed? This is not shutting down Huawei, this is allowing them to expand.
Well, look, it may look like that, but I don't believe it is. And you know what I see here? Two countries, it's like a marriage during the honeymoon stage. They have a common goal right now, is to use their relationship as leverage against the United States. But look, I think this will end in a divorce, if you will. I'll use that term, because you and the other guests mentioned before, there are competing interests here. So we go back to what I said originally. They're using this as leverage against the United States with regard to President Trump's actions. But at the end of the day, all of them are going to have to come together, because there will be impact worldwide impact with regard to the decisions they make. And I think it'll benefit all of us, provided the goal is to do what's right for all of the people who live in each country. And that the president has been very consistent on with regard to the American people.
Einar Tangen, can I get your response to this?
Well, I don't know that it merits a response. Donald Trump in consistency would see an oxymoron. The guy is all over the place. He loves creating dissension and chaos and making people guess. It's part of his idea of transactional negotiation. It's not correct. I mean, it's not the way to do things. Diplomacy and business require that you can rely and trust people, and that's not something Donald Trump does. But in terms of the larger picture, since post-World War II, there has been a three-cornered situation between Russia, China, and the U.S. The U.S. and China came together, and that was part of an issue that, in essence, led to the fall of the Soviet Union. Now you have Russia and China getting together. The U.S. should be worried about this. This kind of hide your head in the sand ostrich approach is not worthy of consideration.
But there is also a transactional nature to be considered here, and I'm sure China is looking at the numbers and where its support will lie. Who is more important to Beijing? Is it the US market, or is it this emerging Russian market?
No, that's the wrong way to look at it. China is looking to expand peacefully. From their perspective, they don't want to create alliances. They're very aware of what happened in World War I. They don't want this kind of heavy movement of different entities aligning up. They're simply being forced into this situation because of what they perceive as very virulent attacks by Donald Trump, not only on the country itself, but on any attempt to try to better themselves. You know, this idea that Huawei is copying everybody. Well, how can you copy somebody and be 2 years ahead of your opponent? So in this particular case, it just doesn't make sense. This is just Donald Trump saying that the U.S., rather than competing, rather doing a Sputnik and responding in kind, has decided to trip up their competitors.
And I'm afraid that will have to be the last word. Gentlemen, it's been a fascinating discussion, but we are out of time. I'd like to thank all of my guests, Viktor Olevich, Einar Tangen and Stephen Rogers. Thank you too for watching the programme. You can catch up again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And the conversation continues online. You can either head to our Facebook page, /AJ Inside Story, or join the discussion on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story, or tweet me directly @Halla Mohieddeen. But for now, from me and the whole team, it's bye for now.